Egypt had its fair share of conquering and of being conquered. Some pharaohs struggled with the ever-growing threats of their neighbours. Some pharaohs would wait till a threat became overwhelming, while others felt it better to take a premeditated advanced strike. This approach would eliminate threats and also act as a kind of warning to others. Don't mess with the Egyptian civilization. There were occasionally other reasons for war, including proving the strength of the pharaoh to his people or to her people, attacking a neighbour for their resources, and war just in order to grow the size of the country or the perceived control of more area. But how did the Egyptians cope with the spoils of war? Well, namely, prisoners of war, because animals, treasures and resources were one thing. Pretty easy, really. You just take them with you. But what do you do with people? The ones that have dared to fight against you? To fight against the great Egyptian civilization? Do you kill them all or take the able-bodied survivors with you? The Egyptians were brutal with anyone who'd taken up arms to fight against them. And this was generally the adult males. Women, children, and the elderly were treated more gently or even left behind. If you fought against the Egyptians and survived, it would not be good for you. It was better not to have survived the battle, especially if you were one of the leaders. A king, for example, of an enemy could expect some very public and cruel treatment back in Egypt. There were some pharaohs that might have taken one of their enemy kings and had them bound and led on a rope. And that rope might have been attached to some pretty unpleasant and medically unclean piercings that they had given the poor fellow. Other pharaohs were known for putting a metal choker around an enemy's neck and chaining them to a location of great visibility, or even shackling their hands and feet and leaving them in a location where everyone might see them. The Egyptians were proud of this demonstration of strength over their enemies, and it's often seen in the many smiting scenes that are on the walls of temples around Egypt. As for slaves, well, the ordinary prisoner could be utilized in this way to tend the land, but they were never involved in any skilled work. No prisoner, for example, was ever used in the restoration of pyramids or the building of temples. The artwork that boasted the military campaigns and the capture of prisoners show a wide range of races involved in this. It didn't matter who you were. If you were a threat to Egypt, you might end up in one of these works of art. A lack of hygiene, close contact with each other, and of course close contact with captured animals, as well as the brutal treatment and conditions of the prisoners, combined to keep the lifespan of the average prisoner to being very brief. And this was due to, of course, disease, malnutrition, dehydration, and infections, etc. It might be said that those pharaohs that simply killed all the prisoners after the battle were in fact the kindest, and that's a pretty horrible thing to say. Essentially, a pharaoh's perspective was that those that fought against Egypt would, one way or another, not live long enough to repeat that mistake. I'm not going to go into any detail of the techniques that the Egyptians used to make their prisoners miserable, but punishments could easily be described as inhumane. I have seen some pictures on walls of body parts, well, namely hands, which have been severed, and in my opinion, these were not taken from living prisoners. I believe they were, as you might say, a show of hands of the number of people who were killed in the battle. And boasting one of these achievements was a primary objective of any pharaoh to his people, and hence to return with a large number of hands was proof that he wasn't just elevating the numbers. As for the pharaohs that did not have the need or desire for conquest, i.e. the nicer ones, they still did their fair share of boasting, but it was more like my father did this and my grandfather did that, and my lineage is that of a great conqueror, so I am hence a great pharaoh. It's still a bit of boasting. So, in my opinion, you can take the brutality out of the pharaoh, but you can't take the pharaoh away from the brutality, or so to speak.